Welcome to Life Turns, where every story is filled with raw emotions, unforgettable lessons, and twists that touch the heart. Today's story is about a wedding that should have been filled with joy but instead left me hidden away in the shadows, until a moment of truth revealed everything my family had overlooked. I still remember the day of my sister's wedding as if it happened yesterday. The air was thick with excitement, relatives bustling around in their finest clothes, the sound of laughter echoing through the decorated hall. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days for our family, but for me, it turned into one of the loneliest. My parents had always favored my sister, and though I tried to push those feelings aside, that day made it impossible to ignore. Instead of being seated with the rest of the guests, they told me to sit in the kitchen, away from the crowd, as if I didn't belong in their celebration. At first, I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe there weren't enough chairs, or maybe someone important needed my spot. I waited for my parents to call me out, to tell me I was welcome to sit at the main tables. But the minutes passed, and nothing changed. My relatives glanced at me, some with pity, others with silent judgment, but no one spoke up. I was dressed nicely, I had even bought new shoes for the occasion, but in that moment I felt invisible, like I was just a burden they were trying to hide. I could hear the music playing from the hall, the clinking of glasses, and the cheers as my sister entered like a queen, glowing in her white dress. She looked beautiful, and for a moment, despite my own pain, I smiled for her. But then the whispers began. Why is she sitting back there? Did her parents not give her a place? Maybe she did something wrong. Every word cut into me like a knife. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the walls so no one would see the shame my own family had placed on me. What hurt the most wasn't the strangers, it was my parents' coldness. They walked past me several times, laughing, chatting, attending to guests, but not once did they look at me. Not once did they think I deserved a seat at the table. They treated me like an outsider in my own family, as if my presence would embarrass them. I tried to hold back tears, telling myself I was strong, but deep inside, a storm was brewing. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made for them. The late nights studying when I could have given up, the way I worked part-time jobs to support myself so I wouldn't ask them for money. I thought about how many times I cheered for my sister, how I covered for her mistakes, how I defended her when others criticized her. And yet, here I was, in the kitchen, like some uninvited guest. My heart felt heavy, but something inside me told me this moment would not define me forever. The turning point came unexpectedly. As I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, something slipped from my pocket. It was my company's badge, the one that carried my name and title, Chief Executive Officer. A relative who had walked in to grab a plate froze when he saw it. His eyes widened as if he had just discovered a secret. He picked it up, read it again, and then looked back at me in disbelief. "You're a CEO?" he asked, his voice louder than intended. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. And just like that, all eyes were on me. In that moment, the shame I had been drowning in began to shift. The whispers turned into gasps, the judgment into curiosity. Relatives who had ignored me minutes ago suddenly wanted to know everything. How did I achieve it? What company did I run? How was it possible that the girl sitting in the kitchen was leading a business while her parents treated her like nothing? The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I could see my parents in the distance, their faces pale as the realization spread across the room. I hadn't planned for this to happen. I never wanted to use my success as a weapon, but that night, it became my shield. I stood up, holding the badge in my hand, and for the first time in years, I let my voice carry across the room. Yes, I said calmly, though my heart was racing, I am a CEO. I built my company from the ground up. I didn't have support, not from my parents, not from anyone in this room. But I worked hard, and I made it here. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of my sister's gasp. My parents didn't know where to look. For years, they had belittled me, told me I wasn't as smart, as talented, or as deserving as my sister. They had compared us constantly, making me feel smaller every single day. But here I was, standing tall, my achievements undeniable. And for the first time, the tables had turned, the air inside the hall was heavy with tension. My relatives, who had always admired my parents' pride in my sister, now looked at them with questions in their eyes. I could almost hear their thoughts. How could parents treat their own daughter this way when she had achieved something so rare and remarkable? My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, trying to mask his embarrassment with a forced smile, while my mother avoided eye contact altogether. For so long, they had painted me as the lesser child, but now, their version of reality was falling apart in front of everyone. I remember my sister's face in that moment. She looked torn, caught between her happiness and her shock. She had always accepted the favoritism in our family as normal, never once questioning why I was overlooked. But when she heard my words, her smile faltered, and a hint of guilt crossed her eyes. She looked at me as though she was seeing me for the very first time, not the quiet, invisible sister she was told I was, but a woman who had built her own empire while carrying years of silence and pain. People began approaching me, one after another. Aunts who had barely spoken to me suddenly wanted to know everything about my business. Cousins who used to laugh when my parents dismissed me now whispered about how inspiring I was. It was strange, almost surreal, watching their attitudes flip in an instant. For years, I had been the shadow, the one nobody cared to acknowledge. But now, the spotlight was on me, and the very people who ignored me were eager to claim some connection to my success. I stood there, answering their questions politely, but inside, my emotions were complicated. Yes, there was pride, the pride of knowing that I had achieved something they could no longer ignore. But there was also pain. Pain that it took a badge, a title, and recognition for them to see me as worthy. Why wasn't I enough when I was just their daughter, their family? Why did I need to prove myself in the harshest ways to earn a place at my own sister's wedding? The music played on, and the ceremony continued, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. I saw guests whispering, glancing at my parents, shaking their heads in disapproval. My parents had always been admired as a respectable couple, but now people saw through them. They saw how blind favoritism had caused them to humiliate one child while glorifying the other. And no matter how much my parents tried to smile, they couldn't erase the shame written across their faces. Later that evening, as the celebration went on, my father finally approached me. His voice was low, almost trembling, as he said, "Why didn't you tell us about your position?" I looked at him, my heart aching at the irony. For years, I had tried to tell them who I was, not with titles, but with my actions, my dreams, my achievements in smaller steps. But every time I spoke, they dismissed me. Every time I tried to shine, they pushed me back into the shadows. So I told him the truth. "Because you never wanted to listen," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. My mother came next, her eyes moist but her pride still keeping her from fully apologizing. She touched my arm gently and whispered, "We just wanted the best for you. You know how hard it is to raise two children." I looked at her and felt a mix of sadness and strength. "No," I replied softly, "you wanted the best for her. You never wanted to see me. But the difference is, I still made it. Without your approval, without your help, I still made it." Her hand trembled as she pulled back, realizing that the daughter she thought she could control no longer needed her validation. The whispers among the guests only grew louder. Some praised me openly, calling me an inspiration. Others criticized my parents, saying they had failed to recognize their own blessing. My sister eventually walked over, her gown trailing behind her, and she hugged me tightly. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I didn't know. I should have stood up for you. I'm sorry." That apology, simple yet heartfelt, meant more to me than anything my parents had said all night. For the first time, I felt like my sister saw me as her equal, not as the shadow standing behind her spotlight. As the night drew to a close, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The stars above were glittering, the cool air brushing against my skin. I thought about how far I had come, about the little girl who once sat in her room crying because her parents only celebrated her sister's achievements. That girl had grown into a woman who no longer needed their approval to feel whole. In that moment, I realized something powerful. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to lift you up will be the very ones who hold you down. But when you rise despite them, your strength becomes undeniable. When I walked back into the hall, the energy felt different. People didn't just see me as the other daughter anymore. They saw me as a person with dignity, someone who had carved out her own destiny. My badge had revealed more than just a title, it had uncovered years of buried truth. I noticed how relatives who once barely remembered my name now made space for me at their tables. For a second, I wondered if I should join them, but then I reminded myself that my worth didn't come from their approval. My worth had always been mine, even when no one else could see it. My parents, though, couldn't escape the stares. Every time they tried to raise a toast, every time they smiled for a photo, whispers followed them. How could they treat her like that? She's their daughter, too. The very pride they used to flaunt about being fair and respected parents was shattered in a single evening. I didn't rejoice in their discomfort, but I couldn't deny that some part of me felt justice had finally been served. As the night wound down, I stayed behind to help some of the staff clean up. Old habits die hard. I had always been the one in the background, helping, tidying, doing the invisible work. One of the waiters, an older man with kind eyes, stopped and said to me, "Miss, I've worked hundreds of weddings, but I've never seen something like tonight. You are stronger than most people I've ever met. Don't let anyone make you forget that." His words struck me deeply, because for the first time, I felt seen by someone who had no bias, no family history, no agenda, just truth. Later, when the guests had left and only close family remained, my father came to me once more. His voice cracked when he said, "We're proud of you." But the words felt hollow, too late, like a bandage slapped on a wound that had already scarred. I looked him in the eyes and replied, "You could have been proud all along. You chose not to be. That was your decision, not mine." His shoulders slumped, and, for once, he had no answer. My mother, standing nearby, wiped her tears silently. Perhaps she wanted to speak, but silence was all she could offer. My sister approached me again, holding her husband's hand. This time, she didn't say much. She just hugged me tightly, as if to tell me that no matter how our parents behaved, she wanted to rebuild something between us. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Because in that hug, I felt a piece of the sibling bond one had always longed for. I knew it wouldn't erase the past, but it was a start, and starts are powerful. On the ride home that night, I stared out of the window at the city lights. I thought about the irony of the entire situation, how the very people who pushed me into the shadows had accidentally forced me to shine. If they had given me a seat at the table, maybe no one would have ever noticed me. Maybe my story would have ended quietly, with me being just another forgotten sibling. But life has a strange way of turning pain into power. By trying to silence me, they made my voice louder than ever. In the days that followed, word spread quickly. Extended relatives called, not to gossip but to tell me how proud they were, how inspired they felt. Some even admitted they regretted never defending me when my parents overlooked me. It was bittersweet, because while their words were kind, I couldn't help but think, where was this support when I needed it most? Still, I chose to accept their encouragement, because holding on to bitterness only chains you to the past. And I was ready to move forward. My relationship with my parents remained strained after that night. They tried in small ways to show me they cared, like calling more often or sending me small gifts. But I no longer craved their approval. I no longer waited for their praise. My success had taught me something far more valuable. Validation from others fades, but self-respect lasts forever. I didn't need them to clap for me, because I had already built a stage where my voice mattered, with or without their applause. Looking back, I realized that wedding wasn't just about my sister marrying the love of her life. For me, it was a turning point, a moment where my hidden strength finally came to light. Yes, it was painful to be sent to the kitchen, treated as less. Yes, it hurt to know my parents chose her over me time and time again. But without that pain, I might never have pushed myself to rise higher, to prove, not to them, but to myself, that I was capable of more. That I was enough all along. So, if you're listening to this story and you've ever felt invisible, ever felt like the people who should celebrate you are the very ones holding you back, I want you to remember something: their blindness doesn't define your brilliance. Your worth doesn't shrink because they fail to see it. Keep working, keep believing, and one day, your light will shine so brightly that even those who doubted you will have no choice but to notice. And when that moment comes, it won't just be about proving them wrong, it will be about proving to yourself that you were always right to keep going.